The one thing I really like about both Avatar Last Airbender and Legend of Korra is that even their endings are, like, still open-ended enough. Like, they don't resolve, like, well, what happens next? Or let's wrap up every single character arc completely. Well, not exactly like that, but, like, let's detail what exactly is going to happen in the future for all of these characters. They never do that. And I kind of like that about the show, because, like, especially given that it's mainly a show for children, even though, of course, it's realistically a show for all audiences, and really should be completely regarded in both directions, they allow for enough open-endedness that you can imagine what could happen next, whether this be your own fan theories, your own fan fictions, or maybe you just read the graphic novels that continued the show. This being literally for both. Aang got his own graphic novel trilogy series, which was initially meant to be an actual animated film, but Nickelodeon shut that down instead to do Korra instead, to expand that into 4 seasons, rather than having it be a 1-season miniseries, which is, I think, was a good idea, you know? Like, as much as I would have loved more Legend of Aang, I think giving Korra more than just, 10 to 12 episodes was a good idea and gave that series room to breathe and to develop. And of course, I just re-finished watching both shows. I haven't fully watched Korra since the first time it came out in, like, 2012 to 2014, and I'm surprised that I actually kind of knew what happened. Like, I'd forgotten pretty much all of it. I knew what the final scene was. I remember some of the villains and some of the characters. So I still had enough surprise factor coming into rewatching it. Of course, rewatching Legend of Aang was like, I love all of this, and I know all of this, but I still love it so much I'm going to rewatch it anyway, because luckily I was a part of the generation that grew up watching the show. So in this video I'm going to be kind of exploring what I think is very effective about the show in its overall runtime. Now, I'm not going to cover Legend of Aang that much, because let's be honest, Legend of Aang is a perfect show. Outside of the one episode in Season 1, which is wholeheartedly skippable, and I love that they made a joke about it in, like, the last season, where they had their kind of clip show episode, where they're just, I'm not good with names of episodes and stuff, so I'm not going to exactly... the name will be here. This episode here, they have their, the Team Avatar go and see a play, and it's about their lives, and it's kind of like a mockumentary on, like, the show itself, and of course addresses some interesting things about, like, the characters dying, like Jet, or how the one episode that was terrible and should not have been in the show, they literally just breeze over it with one tiny gag, and I think that works quite well.
It's the Great Divide! Let's keep flying!
And even though I didn't rewatch that episode for, my rewatch of the show, I don't mind the episode. It obviously doesn't have a good moral and stuff by the end of it, like, especially character stuff, so it's arguably, definitely, easily, very much, wholeheartedly skippable, and it's between 2 great episodes anyway, so, yeah, that's really all I have to talk about with this show. I love it. Toph is my favourite character. I don't have a favourite season, because I think it so perfectly works together, and I think it has it's just great all around. Great animation, great writing, great characters. It's funny. Sokka is great. Sokka? Oh, God. Its pronunciation is still a bitch. I love the whole Japanese influence as well, both the anime-style influence, but also the actual traditional Japanese elements, which I think is beautiful for Legend of Aang. And I watched this without even realizing it was Japan, because again, I don't think I even knew Japan existed, to be honest. When I was a kid, I was not very aware of the whole world, even though I went to multiple countries. I mostly went to Europe. I didn't go to Japan till 2019, so yeah. But that being said, it's a beautiful show and wholeheartedly worth watching for anyone who chooses to. So, outside of the one imperfection of that one, it's not even a terrible episode, it's just a useless episode. Nothing happens. Let's talk about Korra, because that's the one I think really deserves a bit more discussion, because Aang is perfect. 10 out of 10, would watch again, all that wrapped up in a bow kind of perfect. And I have, as you can see here, we have all 3 seasons of it. Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3. all on DVD, which I think are perfectly fine. I don't need them on Blu-ray, even though, my older brother is kind of debating whether we should rewatch it, but if we should get the Blu-ray instead, which is weird, because that's what something I would be saying. But even I decided there's no point, because the Blu-ray doesn't really upgrade the DVDs, because the DVDs look great as it is, and let's be honest, the Blu-ray is pretty, outside of unless you get those collectible steelbooks, which look beautiful, there's no real point in upgrading. You're not going to get much of an added benefit in terms of quality. Also, weirdly, I don't know if anyone else noticed, but the last 2 episodes, or last 3 episodes of Book 2 were in 16:9 aspect ratio. The show's in 4:3, yet those episodes were not. This is the last disc of the series, and I was very confused by that, and it never happened again, and I can't find any forum talked about it. So if that happened to you, please discuss, because I don't know if it was just randomly stretched out for no reason, or if it was actually meant to be made like that. It's kind of weird. Anyway, on to Legend of Korra. So I was very skeptical about coming into Legend of Korra for a second time. I mostly doubted its quality, because I didn't find it memorable at all. And so, of course, rewatching Book 1 Air, it was kind of a struggle to get through. It wasn't for me at least, it wasn't the most entertaining thing. It was very rushed. It felt there was so much that they wanted to explore, but they're okay, we're going to restrict it. It's such a juxtaposition to Aang. Aang is every season they have their one arc, yes, but they're always exploring. They're always building the show for its universe, for its characters, putting its characters into particular situations that seem very episodic. As much as it has its overarching, narrative, it's all very episodic in nature. The only difference for that would be in the last, 3-4 episodes, where it's one, 4-part episode, pretty much. Which is fair enough. But then Korra does it completely differently, which I think is really its perk. Aang came out in a time where shows were still episodic. They didn't need to have, it wasn't this big series-long Crave, Arch of Crave and stuff and whatever. And it had a few more episodes per season as well. Aang had that thing going for it, which I think really worked for it. The episodic nature allowed for each character to develop, for the world building to develop. Everything was really pretty much perfect for it. But then, of course, Korra changed that. It's a few years later, shows run differently. We have to have a real emphasis on the series-long arc, and we don't get much of the individual development. We do to some degree, but for the most part, everything's kind of stretched out, but also really condensed. It's got a weird feeling to it, at least the way I perceived it. The first season was okay, we want to talk about, what happened with Aang, and the Team Avatar, the original Team Avatar. We want to talk about them, but we've got to focus on Korra. We've got to build her as a character. We've got to build her side characters. We've got to build her world. But we don't want to expand past Republic City, because realistically, everything else is the same. This is the only new thing. And so, straight away, you have that complete difference of, we're not going anywhere except for that one part of the Seven Water Tribe, which is really the only thing that's really changed, plus Republic City. And that's fine. I think even the overarching narrative, showing how Aang was able to develop Republic City and how Korra is intertwined into it, plus the villain, is interesting. And especially because each season of Korra has its own individual villain, which is, again, a nice idea. Instead of having this overarching thing, it's more or less about how the overarching thing is how the world is out of balance to some degree, and Korra has to learn to develop herself and to create a better world, or at least a more balanced world. The first season is my least favorite of the seasons. It's the hardest one for me to watch because it's too different to Aang, but that's also the best thing about it. It's very different, and it needs to be. It's evolved in its animation, in the world. This is a steampunky, futuristic, 1920s America mixed with, traditional Japan, and I think that was the step in the right direction. Everything about it realistically was, because I don't even know how you would improve. You've got so much, the creators obviously had so much to tackle in the first season, And, of course, it's about Korra learning to airbend, but also she disconnects, she has no connection to the spirit world. So those are her main two conflicts outside of showing the world that she can be the Avatar. Now, with Aang, of course, he was, 12 years old. He was able to defeat the Fire Lord and, set balance to the whole world and become his full potential while he was still a kid. Whereas Korra is, between the ages of 16 and 20 throughout the whole series of the show. Maybe she's between 16 and 25. I don't think she gets any older than 25, to be honest. I don't know exactly their ages. They don't really stipulate as much. They're teenagers, more or less. And so it's an interesting dichotomy as well as for the factor of I was a teenager, of course, when the show was coming out, which makes sense. You age up the characters to age up, that correlates with the audience. The, younger audiences can still connect to it, but this also would help for audiences who first watched Avatar Legend of Aang, because they were kids. Usually I was a kid when I first watched it, which makes sense. That also was another clever idea that I think that they went with. And the first season it's just, again, for me, it's just too condensed and it doesn't allow itself to breathe. I think maybe if it had an episode more or whatever, something would have spaced it out to allow the characters to breathe more. But even that's what I think may have been, at least for me, maybe it's not its benefit that it tries to carry things throughout a whole entire series for a season long length. Oh god, how the hell am I wording this? Okay, so let's put in juxtaposition. The first two seasons with the third and fourth season are very different in how they structure it. I really like the third and fourth season. I think the third season, actually realistically, the third and fourth season are on par with the best two seasons of the show. I can't say any one is better than the other because they both tackle completely different things, and the fourth season has Toph. So, I mean, Toph. I love Toph, so it's where do we go from there, So, the third and fourth season, I think, are perfect. There is no real issue. Outside of that one episode of the fourth season, their Clips episode, which was, again, a whole thing to do with Nickelodeon with being, it's hard exactly how to phrase it, but more or less the idea was that they didn't want to put in more money, and so they needed, it would have cost them too much to make, another episode, so they had to make a deal, and so the creators were like, alright, we'll make a clip show episode, we'll have 5 minutes of new animation, but it'll just be, the characters reflecting in their lives. Which you think is actually a boring episode, but it's actually not too bad. It's not, you don't need to skip it, because it's not a terrible episode, it's arguably the worst one of the show, but even at that, it's, once you pass maybe the first 10 minutes where Marco's talking about his relationship with Korra and all that stuff you already know and don't really care about, the second half of the episode I think is quite effective, because you're looking at Korra and how she's trying to identify herself through her past conflicts, as well as, you've got Varric's last scene, which I think is hilarious. So, for a 20-minute episode, totally worth it, to be honest. The last 10 minutes, perfect. But there's enough. I've got no real other criticisms about the third and fourth season. I think they're amazing. The villains especially are great. I think the third season may have a bit of a better villain, but to be honest, it's hard to say. They're so effective in what they're trying to do. I do think that the whole Red Lotus thing in the third season, that never comes to play in the fourth season, but I don't really mind because they have, obviously, the villain in the fourth season established right at the very end of the third season. They introduce her, but they don't really show that she's the next bad guy or anything, but it's they introduced her and obviously they knew she was the next villain, which I think was a nice idea. And I think that was a nice introduction to a character. So season 1 and 2. Because season 3 and 4 have a thing where they'll have, again, the overarching plot and story arc, but in between, each episode feels very uniquely its own thing. Maybe there's a character arc that happens between 2 episodes every now and again, say, Lin Beifong, she has a 2-episode character arc, and then that's it. It's resolved enough that you don't need to continue it, but they mention the conversation later on, and of course it still develops her character. And they do things like that, where they have a 2-episode character arc or a 1-episode character arc for every couple of characters, and it gives them enough time to breathe more as characters and develop more. And I think that that was a really good idea because it also breaks up the pacing of the show so it flows better. Because now you're not just living in the world, you're living with the characters. And I think that that was a great idea and a great improvement. The first and second season has a similar type of approach, but it's still very clustered and they're still trying to figure out exactly how they're going to make it all weave together. And I think they're focusing a bit too much on the overarching narrative, which is something that's very different to Legend of Aang. You know, they still have the, oh, we have to defeat the Fire Lord from the very first episode, but it takes them 3 seasons to get to that point, which I think works quite well. You know, even though the first series arc is, you know, get to the Northern Water Tribe and teach Aang waterbending. He's got to master waterbending. But even then, he still doesn't master waterbending. He still achieves a lot, but then it takes, you know, 2 more seasons for him to not exactly still master it, but get enough of the training in there. And the second season, like the first half of the second season, is look for an earthbender teacher. And then, whilst doing that, they discover a conspiracy in, you know, there is no war in Ba Sing Se and all that jazz. And that ends quite nicely with kind of a defeat for the characters. So this is the end of like this of the 3-part arc for the characters. This is their down point. Aang has been killed and resurrected. He's lost his avatar powers more or less. Like he has no connection to that anymore, and you know, and the avatar, like the Fire Nation, is winning. And so of course then the third season is we're going to focus on our 4-part characters. You know, 5 actually, because now Zuko's a part of it. And they're going to focus on that. They're going to strengthen their relationships and strengthen their characters, and overall, you know, make the season quite unique in its own path. All towards the ending of taking over, you know, defeating the Fire Lord. But again, Korra attempts so much in its first season, but at the same time, it's all still necessary stuff. You know, there's nothing unnecessary, and it's still quite effective depending on who's watching it. For me in particular, it's such a juxtaposition to Aang that it's kind of weird, but again, I guess maybe because the series is maybe meant to be written up as a one-shot thing, hey, if we only get 1 good season out of it, that's what we're going to do, because that's pretty much what they were stuck with when it comes to the production of the show. But then the series did really well in, like, critical reception and viewership, so they were given the rest of the show. And the second season, again, they were still trying to perfect their formula, but well, it still did pretty well, to be honest. Like, the first season, I liked how, what exactly they covered in terms of character and villains, and what the villain's whole main ideal was. You know, do we really need an avatar and airbending? Not airbending, but bending as a general thing. And the whole point is to show that bringing all this together creates balance for the world. And so, you know, again, even Toph mentions in the 4th season that all these villains have been trying to, you know, make their own unified world, but they're doing it through imbalance, and chaos, which is not the right path to go, and that's why you need the Avatar. At least the Avatar, for using the Avatar for guidance. The second season, on the other hand, does something that I think really helped me for watching the show. It did something new and different. Because, of course, the first season still has, oh, we've got metal bending as a thing, we're using technology, it's all different. But I'm like, it's still something that we've seen before. But in the second season, it's like, now we're going to expand on the Avatar stuff. Instead of expanding on the world of, you know, Republic City and how that affects with everyone in the rest of the world, we're going to expand on the spirit world. Something that we haven't really done. You know, like we've seen the spirit world in Legend of Aang, of course, in its very minutest of details, but still ever so nicely interwoven into the narrative. And, of course, Aang's character arc. With Korra Season 2, they use the spirit world to introduce the origins of the Avatar, which I think is a great, like, 2-part, I think it's a 2-part episode, maybe a 3-part, but I'm pretty sure it's a 2-part episode in the middle of the season to introduce Avatar 1. I like that one, because he's the first. It's kind of like a pun, really. But they introduce him as the first ever Avatar and show how the world was and how he was able to connect it, but also how he was merely forced to connect it because he would have destroyed, you know, he accidentally let loose, you know, ultimate evil and chaos in spirit form. And I like how they also introduce that. Like, they go back to the traditional Japanese stuff and the idea of, this yin and yang thing. And that it's not just how some spirits have this formula, but also how the world is balanced. And, the world is balanced and whatever. But they show it in spirit form. Ultimate good and ultimate evil. And I like how they showcase that. And, of course, you get this expansion on Korra as a character with her, family history and stuff with the northern and southern water tribes, with how her father was banished and all that deal. And I like how that's a good expansion on her character and the world, because now we're getting something that we didn't really get in the original show. We still had the southern and northern water tribe, but one was a fortified metropolis that was like the last real stand outside of the Earth Kingdom, whereas the Southern Water Tribe was a tiny village. There was nothing really left of it outside of Katara and her family and a few other people. And so now to expand on that, to see how they've developed as cities and as a nation as well, I think that was quite an interesting idea. The one thing that I don't like is, especially with the first and second season, is how obvious the bad guys are. Like, as much as you have the dude with the mask, again, I'm not good with names, so as much as you have this guy here, the villain of the first season, you have additional villains throughout the first season that are pretty obviously bad guys. Like, Varric in particular kind of has a villainy vibe to him, much like Asami, I think it's Asami, her dad, whoever's dad. Again, not good with names, fuck. Why am I not good with names in this show? Does it even say? Nope, doesn't say. Anyway, let's ignore that for now. The second season makes it even more obvious. The minute her uncle, the minute Korra's uncle pops up in the Northern Water Kingdom, he's just like surrounded in villainy. Like, you just know. And I mean, maybe it's because it's meant to be more obvious, but the thing is that they play it out like a few episodes later and it's like, oh, it's a twist. He's actually the bad guy. He was using Avatar the whole time, which is really the only way that they could have pulled it off. But that's the thing with the first and second season. They have those kind of arcs take a few episodes to get to, which is very obvious stuff. Like, what's going to happen. You can see it episodes in advance. At least with the third and fourth season, you have the idea that even though you have these arcs, they're much smaller and effectively communicated much quicker. You could have had, like, the whole Lin and her sister, beef happen throughout the whole entire series, the whole entire season, and have that wrapped up in the last episode. But instead, no, they more or less kind of wrap it up after its first two episodes, but then it's by the end of the next season that you find out that they're pretty much completely square now. And that's effective, it builds upon itself. Second season, on the other hand, again, fails in that communication of takes longer for stuff to happen. Plus, you have the awkward cringiness of, like, all the relationships kind of just going up in the air, and things are bad here, things are good here, and just outside of, like, Bolin's relationship with the one character played by Aubrey Plaza, which was, like, great, but also I don't know if her character completely works with that voice actor, but at the same time it kind of does, and I love the character. And I like how they, that's an interesting relationship. It's very on the nose, and we kind of obviously expect what's going to happen, but it has an interesting turn point by the end of the season. Also, Varric is back, and Varric is great. He does get arrested in the second season, if he's not already arrested, and then comes back, like, in the last episode or whatever, because, of course, there's the big bad guy, becoming the Dark Avatar, which arguably is a cringy idea, but at the same time, it's effectively used, I think, taking the evil spirit, the pure chaos, and putting it into a dude's body, and then he becomes all too powerful, and even though Korra isn't able to connect with her, even though she loses the ability to connect to her past lives and almost completely loses her avatar nature, which is the thing that happens in the previous season as well, where her powers and abilities get taken away from her, but then she, because of it, is able to completely unlock airbending and connect to the spirit world, which allows her to, her past lives to come back and, like, be like, okay, we're going to help you because that's what we're here for, and they give her back her powers. kind of an interesting retcon, but at the same time, not really, because it's an interesting expansion of the Avatar thing. The second season, Rava gets destroyed, but she still is able to kind of come back in a way, and, you know, enough of her energy is there for, you know, Korra to still be the Avatar, but she loses a lot of the quality of what it is to be an Avatar, especially with losing her past lives, so she has to go on by herself, which is something unique that hasn't really been done before. Well, not really at all, to be honest. And so that's an interesting turn of events that happens at the end of the season. And the path to get there is a bit slow and clunky, but those last few episodes are really quite good and really bring it together quite well, because that's usually what the end of a season arc is meant to do. So, yeah. But then, of course, the next season develops that even further, where Korra has to deal with people who, like, the interesting idea already is, like, she's brought the spirit world and connected it with, you know, the human world. They're now connected. The spirit world and the human world are connected, which is very interesting. And even though, arguably, it's like, oh, you know, you could have the argument of, why didn't Aang unlock the, you know, spirit portal and the Seven Water Tribe and all that kind of stuff? It's like, yeah, but he probably didn't know about it, and there's no one to really say, hey, we want you to do this, because it was also a part of the uncle's plan to do it. So, because he was part of the Red Lotus, which is not exactly retconned in the third season, but is more or less utilized as an expansion to show how they, not all of them are, of course, you know, the season 1 villain isn't a part of the Red Lotus, but the season 2 villain is, but it's not really referenced, but then it is in season 3. And season 3 nicely expands upon the world even further with, you know, they travel around more often. You have more airbenders pop up now because the spirit world is now more opened. And there's still a lot more conflict for Korra, because you could even be sitting here being like, oh, come on, God, there's even more conflict in her life. Jeez, how is she going to get past this now? Like, yada, yada, yada. But it's like, without conflict, the show would be boring. And Aang needed conflict, and so did Korra. You know, you need conflict for a show to work. Because that's what the whole entire idea is, you know. You're presented a conflict that is mostly a global problem, and you aim to resolve it. Whether these are small things, like in Aang, where it's a small episodic thing, or in Korra, where it's a series-long thing. You know, it comes in the third season, you know, you gotta stop this guy who's taking away people's bending. You know, the second season, this guy wants to become a dark avatar and, like, rule the world over, like, with, like, 10,000 years of destruction. And it's like, that's a big no-no here. The third season, of course, is the evil quadruple people who are, like, master benders. Like, woman without arms uses water for arms, which is really freaky and awesome. And I hadn't even realized that until, like, the last episode, where I realized she doesn't have arms, but she can bend water to make herself have arms. You got Firepower Woman who could shoot fire from a fucking brain, like in the like Sparky Boom Man in Legend of Aang, who again may or may not have mysteriously died. Then you have the Earthbender who can lava bend, which is a great addition to the show, and I love how Bolin learns how to do that. That was a nice idea, and a good expansion, because given that, like, lightning bending pretty much is, like, kind of a more natural thing, so is metal bending. And then, of course, you have the guy who had no powers, but was the leader of the group, who now gets airbending and masters it so easily. Of course, he had all this previous knowledge and stuff of it, and even by the last 2 episodes learns how to just levitate. You know, he doesn't need, he's like, what is it, this whole entire thing of he's like distanced himself from worldly possessions, and now he's able to float and levitate and fly. That's cool. And their whole thing was to just kill the Avatar and balance the world without, you know, with a world union without leadership and without kings and queens and presidents and stuff. But of course that would entail complete and utter chaos. So you have your dichotomy. And then, of course, the final season with that whole wrap-up of, you know, what the Airbender guy did to Korra has damaged her so much that she, as a person, needs to grow again, but even better, she needs to completely unlock her potential. And, of course, she can't go into she can go into the Avatar state, but she's not ready for it, and there's all this all this baggage that she has to deal with, which again, that's a wrap up, that's a whole season long arc that takes her to do it, but it's more effective because they try to get her to do it, but it takes a toll because, she tries to do it and then she, fights the season 4 villain and loses. Everything she does, she fails at. But then that's her character. Her character is then to build herself up again and become a better, become a more complete person. Of course, she still has the poison from the end of the previous season in her system, but that plus the trauma of her season 3 end of season battle and what it did to her, that it almost killed her and it terrifies her. And of course, it takes Toph and that villain from the end of this 3rd season to teach her how to grow as a person. So that's pretty fun. And season 4, I think, still has a very effective villain, especially because she complements Korra so well, and because they're very similar characters, and they obviously even references at the end of the last episode where she's like, we're very similar people. I know where you're coming from, and they're able to understand each other and come to that understanding, and win. Spoilers. But because the show ends on this note of, some obviously character arcs have been wrapped up, but also people, what happens to Bolin next? What happens to, the Airbenders next? Well, it doesn't matter because you can interpret whatever, you can imagine what happens next in your own mind, or you can read the comics, however it be. So I think overall, the show is very effective in both shows are very effective in what it does for storytelling. I still think Aang is probably the better show and more rewatchable. Maybe it's because of nostalgia, but at the same time, it just is stronger of a narrative and more focused. It has a better appeal, I think, in its episodic nature over season arc nature. Because I think, Korra is still really good, but its first 2 seasons take a while to really get to the point, which is also not great. You don't want to be, just get to the point already. We know what's going to happen. Come on. Maybe we want the season to be more rushed, or maybe not. But the second season allows itself more to flow and to grow, especially in terms of character and expanding the spirit world. Good idea. Expanding the character of the Avatar. What does it mean to be the Avatar? Whereas, because for Aang it was like, it's to be good and to, create balance, and to do that it's just to defeat the Fire Lord. But Korra has all these individual villains which complement the idea of chaos and what it is to be the Avatar in certain perspectives. And of course the 3rd and 4th season expand slowly, but allow for each character. Actually, it's quite fast-paced in terms of what happens. Because this is they come in 2-disc sets, and each disc has half of the season on each disc. And you can binge it quite easily. I was able to binge the first half of season 4 in one day, and the second half today, and it only took me a few hours, because again, it's not a very long show, 20 to 25 minute episodes. It's not very long. And that's what I think is what's also quite nice about it, that you can binge it in such a long period of time, and you get these good arcs of the first arc of the first half of the season to the second arc of the second half of the season. That's what's so really good about the first and the 3rd and 4th seasons of the show. The first season doesn't really have that aspect because it's, again, quite cramped, and it wants to do this, but then it also wants to do this, and it's grasping at straws in its own way, but it still does what it needs to do, and it has an effective outcome. And it's a decent introduction into the rest of the universe. And the second season is more or less split up in thirds, but only because, the middle 2 episodes are the origin of the Avatar. And I think that is also quite an effective way, you have your learning, you have your water tribe conundrum with, Korra needs to, learn about the spirit world and, connect to that part of herself and that part of the Avatar. And then the second half of it is, her connecting to it, but also what can go wrong with it and what her past lives have done as a mistake of closing the 2 worlds off from each other. Also, they bring back Iroh, which was also great. I love that they did that, especially in the 3rd and 4th season, and how Korra just casually mentions it to Zuko. So that's great. In terms of connections to the previous season for Korra. I like how they don't overdo it. Like, of course, the characters are still quite prevalent from the first season. Like, Aang obviously has passed away. Quite young, of course, he was only in his 60s, but they've canonically made it because he was with using the Avatar, power for so long, for 100 years, that it wore off his life energy. And he, even as a character, even realized this, which I don't exactly know where they mentioned. I think maybe in some kind of comic canon, but it's hard to say where exactly they get that from. But of course, the creators were able to detail that. Like, he as a character realized that he was going to pass away soon, and because his life energy was getting lower. So he's passed away, of course, by the stage Korra comes around. Obviously, that's how it works. And Sokka has passed away as well. We find out, of course, we see him briefly again in the first season with that flashback with the whole bloodbending dude and whatever, which again, another villain who's very obvious, the bloodbending dude. Obviously, that guy is a bad guy. I like how because of course they really have to, they kind of need to interweave the whole what happened to the original Avatar troupe within the third season. Because of course, you start off in the first episode and Katara's there. She's training Korra for healing and for waterbending. And of course, that's an important thing, but she's also just kind of a character who's there. It's not exactly, we have to touch on her, we have to have her. It's like, no, because we know her as a character, we know that she's significant enough and powerful enough as a waterbender and a healer to be able to teach Korra. And also, she understands what it's like to be with the Avatar. You have obviously the references, and the only real obviously strong reference is the flashback to the original Bloodbender dude that the original Team Avatar have to face, except for Katara. If I'm not wrong, she may not have been there, but of course you had Toph because she was chief of police. You had Sokka because he was Sokka. I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrong. I always forget for some reason. He's obviously this is what his job is, pretty much. And that makes sense, because that's the kind of character he is. He's a born leader. Even though, of course, he's with a few other people who together lead the whole entire Republic City. And then you, of course, have Aang, who's the Avatar. And so I think that was a nice way to put it in there, and a nice way for Korra as well to connect more to her past lives, because that's something that she still hadn't really done. So having this vision kind of come back in its own flashback thing is very effective for both her as a character and her connection to the Avatar and the overarching narrative for the first season. And I like how, of course, you have, Toph's kids, you have Aang and Katara's kids, no reference of Sokka at all throughout the whole entire show, which is disappointing. Like, did he have kids? Did he not? Did he end up marrying the girl that he was with? And, by the end of Aang and all this stuff, how did he die? We're never going to know, which is disappointing, but at the same time, I don't really think it's too important, And, of course, you have Aang's kids and grandkids that are very prominent in the first season. The second season, they expand upon it, of course, by having, his non-bender son plus his waterbending daughter. This is Aang's other two kids, because Tenzin being his only airbending son, until, of course, Bumi becomes an airbender in the third season, which, pretty nice. And you even have Zuko's daughter appear in, the last season as the Fire Emperor, whatever, Fire Lord, and her son, I'm assuming it would be her son, it's at least Zuko's grandson, who's still voiced by the voice actor who voiced Zuko in original Aang, who is General Iroh, which again, nice touch. Which is again a subtle expansion, because they're important characters to what they need to do. It's not like, reference for reference sake. They have other characters there who aren't, biological descendants of the original series characters or whatever. But they use their references to Aang and his series effectively. The flashback in the first season having, the Tenzin being the only airbending family, which makes sense. And, of course, Chief Bei Fong, which also makes sense. It makes sense in the world. And Katara just being in the Water Tribe the whole time also makes sense. And, of course, the Fire Nation stuff with Zuko and General Iroh and all that stuff, and Zuko's daughter. And then, of course, You even have actual Iroh from the original show, come back in the spirit world, because of course it makes sense that his character would end up there. And finally, of course, you have Toph come back in the final season. And I like that, it's not always, they have, it's arguably fan service, but at the same time, it's not ineffective fan service. They utilize all their characters and all their references effectively, because it makes sense. These people were important to the world, and their descendants are, of course, important to the world in some way or another. The main characters are not related to Aang or any of the original Team Avatar, which I think was a nice idea. We have some new characters, a new slate, a new expansion. And of course, the fact that the first 3 seasons were, of course, Avatar: Last Airbender. You've got Book 1, Water, Book 2, Earth, and Book 3, Fire. Whereas Legend of Korra, you've got Book 1, Air, Book 2, Spirits, Book 3, Change, and Book 4, Balance. Again, effective titles for what the shows and each season represents. And that's pretty much all I really have to say about it. I think they're both great shows. We're not going to talk about that movie, nor the fact that Avatar Aang was meant to have a 4th season, because I don't really care about something that didn't exist. If you want the obvious expansions, you read the comics. Simple as that. Or you just read the really long stuff on the fan pages, and the fandom.com and stuff like that, detail everything that happens in those plots. Like, what happens to Zuko's mum, which is like one of the first things that's said in the first episode of Korra, and they wave it off, because it's like, we're not here to answer those things, because the graphic novels exist, or at least they will exist. And so, yeah, ultimately I think, obviously, Aang, Last Airbender is a tremendous show, 10 out of 10 easy. Korra would be more of, I'd probably give it maybe a 8 out of 10 as a show. The first season for me is more like a 6.5 out of 10. It's a good start, but it still feels quite messy. Maybe rewatching it I would have a different idea, but at the same time, this is the second time I've watched it and it was a struggle to get through it. The second season is an improvement, which I'd probably give more of a 7.5 out of 10. I like its expansion of the spirit world. I think it does effectively in its use of expanding on character and the universe. And then, of course, season 3 and 4, I would give a perfect 10 out of 10, because maybe the last season I give a 9.5 out of 10 only, or 9.9 out of 10, just because of the first 10 minutes of the flashback episode. But at the same time, I don't really mind, because it's at least teaching another character what's going on, so it's expanding at least to some reason. It's relevant, but not exactly. Like, it could just be a backhanded comment, but instead it's just a clip show, which is fine. So yeah, Aang, perfect 10 out of 10, and of course Korra, 8 out of 10. So yeah, I don't know, if you've watched this show, what do you think of it? Do you love it as much as I do? Would you want me to watch the film and review that? I would do it if you want me to, because I've got it on DVD still. Because, of course, we loved Avatar as kids, so of course we saw it in the cinemas. I will watch it if you want me to, and I will review it and talk about it. So, yeah. But I at least can wait until this video comes up before I do that. Outside of that, I hope to someday get the comics and to read them. That would be quite nice. I'd like to see them expand upon it. And I think, because even I was thinking whilst watching like the second season, like, oh, why don't they do a show that expands? During the first and second season, I was thinking, why don't they do a show that expands on Aang stuff, for what he did between Legend of Aang and Korra. But the flashback thing was really enough. I don't think you really needed anything more to it. You could, of course, expand it in the graphic novels, but you don't exactly need to expand it in animated form. You could, if the creators came up with a good idea or something. But I like how they backed away from that idea and instead went for Korra. But then even the second season, I'm thinking, oh, they should expand more into, like, the first Avatar and, stuff like that. But it's like, but then they do. And it's like, it's a 2-episode thing and you don't need a whole entire show to do it. And it's like, oh, wow, that actually was really effective. And I think that's where they kind of got the idea of, oh, we can do a 2-episode arc for a character. This was a whole entire narrative. So they simplified that and chuck in the next 2 seasons as, well, we'll give these characters like a 1-episode arc or a 2-episode arc, or maybe a 3-episode arc that's loosely connected, but like it gives you enough time to breathe and connect it together as it is, because the characters need to actually move and do things to understand them, and grow. By the time I got to the third and fourth season, I wasn't thinking about expanding anywhere else. Would I like a fifth season of Korra? I'm not against it, but she's been through enough. Give her a break. And that's about it. Like, I would love to see another show. I don't know if I'd want them to expand in the past or expand in the future, because the shows stand alone so well that Aang is such a good example of the best of what those previous Avatar lives were probably like, even though you could expand upon one of the avatars that we haven't heard about. And then you have, of course, Korra, which disconnects itself from all that kind of stuff. So the most realistic thing to do would be to push forward in time, but don't really think we need to see a modern day version of Avatar. Let's be honest, I don't think that would exactly work. Like, their 1920s version, their kind of steampunky version, works quite well. So, yeah. Lastly, which I completely forgot that I was wanting to mention, because obviously I mentioned that Toph is my favourite character in Legend of Aang. As much as I love her in Korra, an overarching character I think who is my favourite would probably be Varric. I love how hilarious he is. He's also obviously he's a smart character, does some dumb things, but of course he learns from that. And in the third and fourth season, he's obviously a much more realised character. Also, Julie. You can't have Varric without Julie. You can't have Julie without Varric. I love them both. They're easily my favourite characters. And I'm so happy with how their arc ended in the final season. Best characters ever. Well, second best, I guess, because Toph still triumphs. She's still great, even as a much more older lady. It's great. I love it. 10 out of 10. And that's it. Thank you all for watching. I have enjoyed watching these shows, and I would highly recommend watching them. I think Avatar Legend of Aang is now on Netflix. I don't know about Korra yet, but if you don't want to watch Korra, you don't have to, but I still think it's a really good show. It's something different and unique enough, and yeah, it's unique enough in comparison to Aang that you don't need to rely on watching Legend of Aang to understand what's happening in Korra, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt. It's like watching Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. It doesn't hurt to watch the original, but you can watch the second one as a standalone thing as it is. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Adios. Cool. What show am I going to watch now?